Welcome back. We are answering your questions about coronavirus with Cone Health's Infection Prevention Medical Director, Dr. Cynthia Snyder. You can text your questions to us. The number's at the bottom of the screen. This text question says, has anyone noticed the correlation between the increase in COVID cases with the opening of public schools? Is there a correlation?
So I think there's probably a correlation with opening a community up. We know that there are more cases associated with higher education. You know, there's been several outbreaks that some of the universities and colleges have to deal with. And because of the increasing rates in our community, I know that the Board of Education and the state have been very reticent at opening up schools completely. So it's still utmost important to for the community as a whole to really observe the 3 W's, and especially if any children have any symptoms that suggest that they may have like a cold-like illness, that's important to get tested to ensure that they don't have COVID-19 and expose their classmates.
The question says, I have had COVID-19. It's been 60 days, but I still have fatigue. How do I get over this fatigue?
We are finding a lot more about COVID-19, especially now that we're like 7 months into this pandemic. We know that there are a subset of folks that do have these kind of this chronic process of fatigue, also maybe a process of like brain fog, and it's exceptionally challenging. We're not exactly sure how to predict who gets that process or who doesn't. And then most importantly, how do you feel better from it? I think it makes sense to follow up with your primary care doctor just to ensure that there's nothing else that's being missed.
This text says, we adults have tested positive for COVID, but our granddaughter is at home with us and she is 1 year old. Is it okay that she is home with us?
So ideally, when somebody tests positive for COVID-19, we would like for them to be isolated away from any other family members. However, we know that's not always doable, especially if you have other family members that you don't know their status, like your granddaughter. I think the safest thing is ensuring that you are wearing a mask while you're close to her, within that 6 feet. And then ensuring that you're doing proper like hand hygiene. If you're taking care of her full time, there may be a chance that she's also been exposed and has had it, but may be asymptomatic.
What is the incubation period for COVID? I saw someone last Tuesday. They were asymptomatic, but then they tested positive the following Friday. Am I at risk?
So the incubation period after you've come in close contact with somebody that's had COVID is 14 days. And when somebody's has very mild symptoms or asymptomatic, we often think that they still may be shedding virus even up to 2 days before their test is positive. So we often recommend that if you've been exposed to somebody that's COVID positive, that you should still try to quarantine for the next 14 days. The optimal time for testing would be about 5 days after you have your exposure to them. However, that doesn't like get you out of jail from quarantine. You know, you still may convert after 5 days. And so some people also get retested towards the end of the incubation period at day 12, day 14.
Someone is worried about catching COVID-19 again. Is it possible?
You know, we are starting to see these reports of patients who have had COVID earlier in the springtime and have respiratory illnesses a couple months later. It turns out that we think that most people have some sort of immunity for at least about 3 months. We don't really know to what extent extent somebody's going to get reinfected. We have seen cases of it happening, but it's still considered very infrequent.
But as you said, this has been 7 months, and so we're learning all kinds of things all the time.
Right. The thought is still that as the vaccine comes out next year, that our recommendations is still to get vaccinated.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking all of our questions from our viewers. We so appreciate it. Thank you for sending in your questions. WFMY News 2 at 6 is coming up next.